In 1999, eBay was worth more than Amazon and Google combined. They invented online shopping as we know it. Then they made one catastrophic mistake that cost them everything. Today, most people under 25 don't even know eBay still exists. What happened to eBay? Seriously, when was the last time you bought something on eBay? When was the last time you even thought about eBay? This company literally created the online marketplace. They proved that strangers on the internet could trust each other enough to exchange money and products. They made ordinary people into entrepreneurs. At their peak, eBay was the internet success story. Then Amazon came along and eBay just disappeared. But the real story of how eBay fell from dominance is way more complicated and way more fascinating than you think. This isn't just about competition. It's about a company that forgot who it was. And today, we're breaking down exactly how the king of e-commerce lost its crown. Let's rewind to Labor Day weekend, 1995. A software programmer named Pierre Omidyar is sitting in his San Jose living room thinking about the internet. The internet was new. Most people didn't have it. The ones who did mainly used it for email and chat rooms. Nobody was really buying or selling things online yet. There was no Amazon, no Google, no online shopping as we know it. Pierre had an idea. What if people could auction things to each other online? Not through a company or store, but directly person to person, like a giant garage sale where everyone in the world could participate. He spent a long weekend coding a simple website. He called it Auction Web. It was basic, ugly even, just text and links. You could list an item, other people could bid on it, and the highest bidder won. That was it. Pierre listed the site on a Monday and didn't expect much. Maybe a few tech nerds would try it out. But something weird happened. People started using it immediately. And not just for normal stuff. The first item ever sold on eBay was a broken laser pointer. Pierre listed it as a test, describing it honestly as broken and non-functional. Someone bought it for $14. Pierre was confused. He emailed the buyer asking if they understood the laser pointer didn't work. The buyer replied, "I'm a collector of broken laser pointers." In that moment, Pierre realized something profound. There was a buyer for everything. Every weird thing, every broken thing, every random thing sitting in someone's garage that seemed worthless. On the internet, you could find the one person in the world who wanted it. Word spread quickly. By the end of 1995, thousands of people were using Auction Web. Pierre was running it from his house as a hobby while keeping his day job. He didn't charge anything at first. But the traffic got so heavy that his internet service provider told him he needed to upgrade to a business account, which cost $250 a month. So Pierre started charging a small fee for listings, just to cover costs. Then the checks started arriving. Lots of checks. People were paying the listing fees, and Pierre was making way more than $250 a month. By February 1996, he was making thousands. He quit his job to work on Auction Web full-time. His girlfriend, who would later become his wife, suggested he change the name to something catchier. He wanted to call it Echo Bay, but that domain was taken. So he shortened it to eBay. The growth was explosive. In 1996, eBay did $7 million in gross merchandise sales. In 1997, that jumped to $95 million. The site was doubling every few months. What made eBay special wasn't the technology. The site was still pretty basic. What made it special was the community. Regular people were becoming sellers. They'd clean out their attics and basements and list stuff on eBay. Then they'd discover they could make real money doing this. So they'd start going to garage sales and thrift stores, buying things cheap and reselling them on eBay for profit. Pierre understood that trust was the biggest challenge. How do you get people to send money to strangers on the internet? How do you prevent fraud? His solution was brilliant in its simplicity. He created a feedback system. After each transaction, buyers and sellers would rate each other. Good sellers built up positive feedback scores. Bad sellers got negative feedback and people would avoid them. It was crowdsourced reputation management, and it worked beautifully. This feedback system became one of eBay's most important innovations. It created accountability in a system that could have been chaos. By 1997, eBay was a phenomenon. They had millions of users. People were quitting their jobs to sell on eBay full-time. The media was writing stories about eBay millionaires who'd built businesses selling Beanie Babies or vintage clothing or collectible coins. eBay wasn't just a website, it was creating a new economy. The company went public in September 1998. The stock opened at $18 and closed the first day at $47. Pierre Omidyar became a billionaire at age 31. The company that started as a weekend project was now worth billions. But Pierre knew he wasn't the right person to run a massive public company. He was a programmer and product guy, not a business executive. So in 1998, eBay hired Meg Whitman as CEO. Meg came from Hasbro, the toy company, and had experience at consulting firms and Disney. She understood brands and consumers and how to scale businesses. This hire was crucial. Under Meg, eBay went from a quirky tech startup to a professional global corporation. Meg's strategy was aggressive expansion. She took eBay international, launching sites in dozens of countries. She acquired competitors. She expanded the categories beyond collectibles into electronics, clothing, cars, real estate, basically everything. She professionalized the operations while trying to keep the community feel that made eBay special. And it worked. Revenue exploded from $86 million in 1998 to over $1 billion by 2002. eBay also made smart acquisitions during this period. In 2002, they bought PayPal for $1.5 billion. PayPal had become the dominant payment method on eBay, even though it was a separate company. Buyers and sellers preferred PayPal over traditional payment methods because it was faster and easier. By buying PayPal, eBay controlled the entire transaction flow. They made money on the listing fees, the final value fees, and the payment processing fees. It was a brilliant vertical integration. At its peak in the mid-2000s, eBay was unstoppable. They had over 200 million registered users. They were facilitating over $60 billion in transactions annually. They were in dozens of countries. They were profitable and growing. Wall Street loved them. Analysts called them one of the best business models on the internet. After all, eBay didn't hold inventory. They didn't ship products. They didn't deal with returns. They just connected buyers and sellers and took a cut. It was a perfect marketplace model with incredible margins. But while eBay was celebrating its success, the seeds of its decline were already being planted. And they came from two very different directions. First, there was Amazon. When eBay was getting huge in the late 1990s, Amazon was still just an online bookstore. They were much smaller than eBay. But Amazon's founder, Jeff Bezos, had a different vision. He didn't want a marketplace where individuals sold to each other. He wanted Amazon to be a store where you could buy anything new, quickly, with reliable shipping and easy returns. Two completely different models. For years, eBay didn't see Amazon as a real competitor. They were in different businesses. eBay was about unique items, collectibles, used goods, auctions. Amazon was about new products with fixed prices. There wasn't much overlap. But slowly, Amazon started expanding. They added electronics, then toys, then clothing, then everything. And critically, in 2000, Amazon launched their own third-party marketplace, allowing other sellers to list products on Amazon. This is where things got dangerous for eBay. Amazon's marketplace gave sellers an alternative, and Amazon's version had some major advantages. On eBay, everything felt uncertain. Auctions meant you didn't know what price you'd get. Buyers had to wait for auctions to end. Shipping was inconsistent because every seller handled it differently. On Amazon, you could list items with fixed prices. Buyers could purchase instantly. Amazon offered fulfillment services where they'd store and ship products for sellers. It was more professional, more predictable, more reliable. But Amazon's threat emerged slowly over years. The more immediate crisis came from within eBay itself. As the company grew, it changed. And not in ways the community liked. Remember, eBay started as a place for regular people to sell their stuff. It was democratic. It was quirky. It had personality. But as eBay got bigger and more corporate, it started to feel cold and impersonal. The fees kept increasing. In the early days, eBay's fees were tiny, just enough to cover costs and make a modest profit. But as Wall Street demanded more growth and higher profits, eBay kept raising fees. Listing fees went up. Final value fees went up. PayPal fees went up. Sellers who had built businesses on eBay suddenly found their margins squeezed. What used to be profitable wasn't anymore. eBay also started making changes that favored large professional sellers over small individual sellers. They created programs like Top-Rated Seller that gave advantages to sellers with high volume and perfect metrics. In theory, this was to improve buyer experience by promoting reliable sellers. In practice, it made it much harder for casual sellers to compete. The platform that had democratized online selling was now creating a hierarchy where big sellers had huge advantages. The search algorithm changed too. Originally, listings appeared in chronological order. Newest listings appeared first. This was fair. Everyone had an equal shot at visibility. But eBay changed to a best match algorithm that promoted certain listings based on factors like seller rating, price, and shipping speed. Again, this favored professional sellers with resources and infrastructure. The mom selling her kids' old toys couldn't compete with a business shipping hundreds of items per day. Worse, eBay started aggressively pursuing fraud and policy violations, which was necessary, but they did it clumsily. Sellers would suddenly find their accounts suspended with little explanation or recourse. Items would be removed from listings without clear reasons. The appeals process was terrible. Sellers felt like eBay didn't care about them anymore. They were just transaction numbers. The community that had been eBay's greatest strength started to revolt. Seller forums filled with complaints. People talked about leaving for other platforms. But where else could they go? For years, there wasn't really an alternative. eBay had such dominance that sellers were stuck. They'd complain, but they'd keep using the platform because they had no choice. Then came 2008 and a decision so catastrophically bad that it's still talked about in business schools as a case study in how to destroy customer loyalty. eBay decided to change their feedback system. Remember, the feedback system was foundational to eBay. It created trust and accountability. But eBay noticed a problem. Sellers would sometimes leave retaliatory negative feedback for buyers who gave them bad reviews. A buyer would complain about a product, leave negative feedback, and the seller would immediately leave negative feedback for the buyer in revenge. This scared buyers from leaving honest feedback. So eBay made a change. Sellers could no longer leave negative feedback for buyers, only positive. Buyers could still leave negative feedback for sellers, but sellers couldn't respond in kind. eBay's logic was that buyers were customers and should be protected. Sellers were essentially service providers and should be held accountable. The seller community went ballistic. This change fundamentally altered the power dynamic. Buyers could now leave unfair negative feedback with no consequences. They could demand refunds or threaten bad feedback to get free stuff. Sellers had no recourse. And because seller ratings affected search placement and fees, bad feedback could destroy a business. Sellers organized protests. They temporarily shut down their stores in coordinated boycotts. They created websites explaining why they were leaving eBay. Many followed through and left the platform entirely. For the first time, there was a real seller exodus. Some went to Amazon, some went to smaller competitors like Bonanza or eCrater. Some built their own websites. eBay had broken trust with the people who made the platform valuable. eBay's management didn't seem to understand the magnitude of the problem. They saw unhappy sellers as a vocal minority. They believed the changes would improve buyer experience, and that's what mattered. They were optimizing for buyer satisfaction at the expense of seller satisfaction. In the short term, this might work, but in the long term, without sellers, you don't have a marketplace. To make matters worse, eBay was facing new competition beyond Amazon. Craigslist was taking the market for local items that people didn't want to ship. Facebook Marketplace would later take even more. Etsy emerged as the destination for handmade and vintage items, stealing a key demographic from eBay. Specialized marketplaces popped up for specific niches like sneakers, designer clothes, and electronics. eBay tried to respond but kept making mistakes. They acquired StubHub, the ticket marketplace, for $310 million in 2007. Not a bad acquisition, but it had nothing to do with their core business. They bought Skype in 2005 for $2.6 billion, thinking it would help buyers and sellers communicate. It didn't make sense, and they eventually sold it for a loss. They were spending billions on acquisitions that didn't strengthen their core marketplace. Meanwhile, Amazon was eating their lunch. Amazon had figured out that speed and reliability mattered more than price for most purchases. They launched Amazon Prime in 2005, offering free 2-day shipping for a yearly fee. This changed everything. Customers got used to fast, predictable shipping. eBay's model, where every seller had different shipping times and costs, started to feel outdated and annoying. Amazon also invested heavily in their fulfillment network. They built massive warehouses across the country. They developed sophisticated logistics systems. They made it incredibly easy for sellers to use Fulfillment by Amazon, or FBA, where Amazon would store, pack, and ship products. Sellers loved this because it removed the operational headaches. Buyers loved it because it meant prime shipping on third-party items. eBay had no equivalent. They tried to create shipping programs and partnerships, but they didn't have the infrastructure Amazon had built. They couldn't compete on shipping speed. And in e-commerce, shipping speed had become table stakes. The strategic mistakes kept piling up. In 2009, Meg Whitman left as CEO after 10 years. She'd grown the company enormously, but she was also leaving behind serious problems. Her successor, John Donahoe, tried to transform eBay into a more modern e-commerce platform. He pushed mobile apps. He emphasized fixed-price listings over auctions. He tried to clean up the site and make it more like Amazon. But every change alienated the core community more. The people who loved eBay loved it because it wasn't Amazon. It was weird and quirky and full of unique items. Donahoe's strategy to make eBay more like Amazon meant making it less special. And if eBay was just a worse version of Amazon, why would anyone use it? The China experiment was another disaster. eBay had entered China early and initially did well, but they faced a local competitor called Taobao, owned by Alibaba. eBay was confident they'd win because they had the brand, resources, and experience. But Taobao understood Chinese consumers better. They offered free listings while eBay charged fees. They built in instant messaging so buyers and sellers could chat, which Chinese consumers expected. They adapted to local preferences. By 2006, eBay had lost in China and shut down their operations there. It was an embarrassing defeat and a huge missed opportunity. China became the largest e-commerce market in the world, and eBay had zero presence there. Meanwhile, Alibaba used their dominance in China as a springboard to global expansion. The PayPal situation became complicated too. After buying PayPal, eBay required sellers to offer it as a payment option. This made sense for integration, but PayPal was growing beyond eBay. It was becoming a payment platform used across the internet. Increasingly, PayPal's growth came from non-eBay transactions. eBay's investors started questioning whether the two businesses should be separate. In 2015, eBay spun off PayPal as an independent company. This was probably the right business decision, but it had symbolic weight. PayPal had been eBay's most successful asset. Spinning it off felt like an admission that eBay's core marketplace business wasn't strong enough to stand on its own, and it wasn't. After the PayPal spinoff, eBay's stock underperformed. PayPal's stock soared. The payment business was more valuable than the marketplace that created it. By 2015, eBay's identity crisis was complete. They weren't the scrappy startup connecting people to people anymore. But they also weren't a modern e-commerce platform that could compete with Amazon. They were stuck in the middle. Revenue had stagnated around $8 to $9 billion annually. They weren't shrinking, but they weren't growing much either. They'd become irrelevant. The statistics were damning. In the early 2000s, eBay and Amazon had similar revenue. By 2015, Amazon was doing 10 times more revenue than eBay. Amazon had 300 million active customers. eBay had 162 million. The gap was widening every year. Surveys showed that younger consumers had barely heard of eBay or thought of it as a place their parents used. The cultural impact told the story. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, eBay was constantly referenced in pop culture. TV shows made jokes about eBay. People would say, "I'll sell it on eBay," as a common phrase. By 2015, those references had disappeared. People said, "I'll sell it on Amazon," or just, "I'll sell it online." eBay had lost mindshare. The company tried various strategies to revive growth. They invested in advertising, running TV commercials trying to remind people eBay existed. They redesigned the website multiple times, trying to make it cleaner and more modern. They emphasized their mobile apps, recognizing that shopping was moving to phones. They highlighted unique items and collectibles, trying to differentiate from Amazon's focus on commodity products. Nothing worked. Or more accurately, nothing moved the needle enough to matter. eBay had become the blockbuster of e-commerce, still technically alive, still generating revenue, but clearly declining and losing relevance daily. The pandemic in 2020 created a brief moment of hope. With everyone stuck at home, people cleaned out their houses and sold stuff online. People looked for deals to save money. eBay saw a surge in usage. Revenue grew. The stock price jumped. Analysts wondered if eBay could make a comeback, but it was temporary. As the world reopened, the growth faded. People went back to their normal shopping habits, which increasingly meant Amazon for new stuff and Facebook Marketplace for used stuff locally. eBay remained in the awkward middle ground. The business today is stable but uninspiring. eBay does around $10 billion in annual revenue. They're profitable. They have about 135 million active buyers. They facilitate around $70 billion in gross merchandise volume. These aren't bad numbers. Many companies would love to have eBay's size and profitability. But compared to what eBay was and what it could have been, it's disappointing. The real tragedy is that eBay could have been Amazon. They had the head start. They had the brand recognition. They had the community. They had the trust. If they'd made different decisions in the 2000s, the e-commerce landscape could look totally different today. What if eBay had built a fulfillment network like Amazon? What if they'd maintained their focus on community and small sellers? What if they'd adapted to mobile faster? What if they'd never changed the feedback system? These aren't just hypotheticals. They represent real decision points where eBay chose wrong. And those decisions compounded over years into strategic failure. So what killed eBay? It wasn't one thing. It was death by 1,000 cuts. They raised fees and alienated sellers. They changed policies that destroyed trust. They tried to compete with Amazon on Amazon's terms instead of playing to their own strengths. They lost their identity in the pursuit of growth. They made expensive acquisitions that didn't pay off. They failed in international markets like China. They became bureaucratic and stopped innovating. But underneath all of that, the core problem was simple. eBay forgot why people loved them in the first place. People loved eBay because it was democratic, because anyone could become a seller, because you could find unique items you couldn't get anywhere else, because it felt like a community, not a corporation. As eBay grew and became more professional and more corporate, they lost that magic. They optimized for efficiency and profits and forgot about the human connection that made them special. Amazon won because they never lost sight of their mission. Jeff Bezos always said Amazon was about customer obsession. Everything they did was measured against whether it made the customer experience better. Even when they made mistakes, they were consistent. eBay kept changing strategies, chasing trends, reacting to competitors. They never had a clear vision for what they wanted to be, so they became nothing in particular. The lessons from eBay's decline are relevant for any business. First, know what makes you special and protect it. Your competitive advantage is usually rooted in something unique about your culture, community, or approach. If you lose that in pursuit of growth, you lose everything. Second, listen to your core users. eBay's sellers were screaming that the changes were hurting them. Management didn't listen because they thought they knew better. They were wrong. Third, you can't be everything to everyone. eBay tried to be both a marketplace for unique items and a competitor to Amazon's retail store. They ended up being mediocre at both. Fourth, infrastructure matters. Amazon invested billions in warehouses and logistics when it wasn't profitable because Bezos knew it would be crucial long-term. eBay didn't make those investments. When fast shipping became essential, eBay couldn't compete. Fifth, culture eats strategy for breakfast. eBay's strategy of professionalizing and growing made sense on paper, but it destroyed the quirky community culture that was their real asset. And sixth, past success doesn't guarantee future relevance. eBay assumed their dominance would last. They didn't adapt fast enough to changes in technology, consumer behavior, and competition. Today, eBay still exists, They're still a multi-billion-dollar company. They still serve millions of customers. But they're a shadow of what they once were. They went from defining e-commerce to being an afterthought. From being the first place people thought of for online shopping to being something people vaguely remember exists. The saddest part is it didn't have to be this way. eBay had every advantage. They had the technology, the users, the brand, the resources. They just needed to stay true to themselves and keep innovating. Instead, they lost their identity trying to become something they weren't. In 1999, if you'd asked anyone which would be bigger in 2025, Amazon or eBay, most people would have said eBay. Amazon was just a bookstore. eBay was the future of commerce. But the future doesn't belong to whoever gets there first. It belongs to whoever executes best and adapts fastest. Amazon did. eBay didn't. And that's the story of how the forgotten king lost its crown. The rise and fall of giants never stops repeating, and the next video shows another empire that refused to adapt.